Welcome back. You're listening to Stribling's New York. That was Nadine Jacinto, a radio professional and executive from the Philippines. And our next guest on Stribling's New York here on WOR AM 710 on your digital dial has joined us in the studio along with our producer, Tony Simone. Welcome, Eric Grimmelman, He is the president of the New York Tech Alliance, a nonprofit whose mission is to represent, inspire, support, and help lead the New York technology community and ecosystem to create a better future for all. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure.
So you were admonishing me because I used to have a show on WOR called Tech Hub, and Mayor Bloomberg had his show at the time. And not that he and I strolled down the hallways here arm in arm, but he did tell me to call New York City Silicon Alley at the time, and we were saying that that's changing and evolving. So tell us about that, what you do, and what's going on technology-wise in New York.
Well, there's lots happening, and the reason we're not thrilled with the term Silicon Alley is it compares us directly to Silicon Valley, and we are different. New York is very different. Tech in New York is booming right now because people are applying tech across the board. So it's not about the tech sector as much about tech in everything. So we have fashion tech and finance tech and real estate and publishing and media and on and on. And so it's about applying tech to all the industries which are big in New York. And it's not a separate industry where we're building devices or writing software that's terribly specific. It's more applying it to everything.
That makes complete sense.
Very much so.
The problem is we don't, at this point, have a great other term other than New York. But
I'm fine with New York City being the capital of technology. Can we just stick with it?
How is Cornell going to impact that as their new campus begins to grow and develop?
Cornell will be important for two reasons. It's already having an impact, even though the new campus isn't ready. They're working out of the Google complex. What New York has lacked is direct involvement, and I'm generalizing here, but direct involvement between the major universities and the startup community. It's not the same here in New York as it is in Boston or Stanford or Pittsburgh with Carnegie Mellon. The academic institutions here have been more academic and have focused more on research than on spinning out companies. Cornell Tech has been designed specifically to foster that spinning out of companies and working very closely with the commercial sector. And we're seeing Columbia and NYU moving in that direction as well. So I think the second way that Cornell Tech will have an impact is through catalyzing an evolution of the other institutions here in town, the academic institutions.
And will you be working as a liaison as well to
Absolutely
foster that?
Yes. We already have relationships with Cornell Tech, and of course we have them with Columbia and NYU and City University.
Oh, the whole tech industry or tech world is really amazing to me because my son has worked in it now. He's moved to the public sector in Washington, but he worked for a VC firm for a number of years in New York City, and I got to see the different kinds of companies that are emerging and just how everything is changing. And I looked at your resume, which is formidable, and it's just very impressive. And how do you keep up with it?
Oh, that's the fun part. If you're going to be in tech, and probably more generally in anything these days, you have to move quickly because the world is changing. And that's the big difference between now and 10, 20 years ago. The pace is quickened. The rate of change is much more rapid. And that means you can't study something and then work at it and do that your entire career. If you're a computer programmer, you learn a language and you have to learn a new one in 10 years because the new ones are available and become more popular, and for good reasons. They do more things than the older ones would have. And so if you're joining tech, then you're signing up for lifelong learning, which can be tremendously exhilarating, but you just have to keep looking for new opportunities and accepting the ones that show up in front of you.
Well, you have a PhD. I was thinking about what happens now if you get a tech-oriented PhD. But by the time you finish your dissertation, it may be moot.
Well, my PhD is in chemistry, and I did a postdoc at Bell Labs in chemistry and then left the field. So, I spent 6 years getting a PhD, 2 years as a postdoc, and then I moved on to a different field. And I used what I learned. I still use that. But that's not atypical, that one learns something and then applies it to the next thing, because no matter what you're doing, it's going to be different than it was even a few years ago.
Now, is the perception the reality that the tech industry has a hard time finding enough skilled workers in New York?
That is true in New York. It is true throughout the United States. It's true throughout the world. There is a shortage of talented, trained people with the skills that industry needs everywhere. New York's no exception.
Without getting into the immigration debate, clearly that's why the tech community, I think, has been advocating, right, to reform the visa. What do they call it?
H-1B visas.
H-1B visa.
Well, we support an extension of an expansion of the H-1B visa program, which would bring in highly skilled foreign workers. But that's only part of the problem. The larger problem is the workforce. And we're not going to solve that problem just through immigration.
Oh, sure.
And so we're very active in working with others on the problem of workforce development. How do we motivate and train the hundreds of thousands of people that will be needed to fill the jobs in the future?
And you're doing great work, and you're pushing for more STEM education, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Learning coding when you're in kindergarten.
Well, it's not that you need.
I was half joking.
Well, only half, because it's not that you need to code when you get to first grade,
Sure,
so therefore you need introduction in kindergarten. But it turns out that people make career choices fairly early in their lives, and by the time you're in junior high school, you probably have a pretty good idea of what direction you're going to head in. And so, if you don't think of tech and haven't been exposed to it and haven't had a chance to figure out if it's for you, asking that question in college is way too late.
Well, what fascinates me is all the amazing ideas that all these smart, talented people have. The problem is only a certain number of them are going to be successful. I'd be a terrible venture capitalist because every person I had hundreds of startups on my show, and I wanted to invest in every single one of them. And it's what seemed to be the case 30 years ago is when I was getting out of college, everybody wanted to work on Wall Street for Goldman Sachs or First Boston or a big investment bank. And now young people are getting out of school, and instead of thinking about going to graduate school, they want to start their own startup, some kind of new company.
Is the startup industry still growing in New York? I feel every day another friend is starting a new startup.
Oh, it is indeed. But as you pointed out, most startups don't succeed in a narrow sense. But what one learns through the failures is really important, and there are many, many case studies of companies that aren't someone's first endeavor, that they've learned. The first startup I was part of was a miserable failure. The second one did better, but timing was off. We couldn't raise enough money to take the company to the next level, and without that, it folded. The third one is doing okay. So part of it's luck, part of it's timing, which is also somewhat luck, and it's all interesting, and it all contributes. Lots of good ideas come out of failures.
I was going to say it's a good point, because not every time a startup you'll be able to monetize it, correct? But the ideas coming out of it could eventually, based on timing, lead. Right? We can all be Facebook, or we can all be LinkedIn. Right, the social media networks.
Right. Well, but
or the best laundry app, right? I feel like the other day I got 8 laundry apps to join. I'm like, how many efficient laundry and delivery apps do you need?
Well, the answer probably is you need one. It's probably better if there's more than one, so you can choose. That'll keep the one on their toes.
Right.
But the market figures that out. The market's pretty good at figuring out how many are needed and what the good one is. But startups that don't succeed can have valuable benefits. One can learn good things from them, and then one can learn what not to do.
Well, it also seems like the advent of startups is we're breeding new generations of entrepreneurs rather than worker bees. And
well,
I look at that as a positive.
Well, the key, in my opinion, is innovation, and startups are a good way for innovation to occur. And the nature of innovation has changed over the years, and where it occurs has changed. I spent 12 years at Bell Labs. That was an enormous source of innovation at the time. But the world changed, and you don't have the big industrial labs anymore, and so the innovation is happening in startups. The world still needs the innovation, and when the larger companies need innovation, they will typically buy a startup that has proven capability in a particular area that's of interest to them. Which means that the larger companies need to be expert in following the startups and working with them, and in some cases investing in them. And the world needs larger and smaller companies. It's much easier to innovate in a smaller company, but things really matter from an economic perspective when the company gets large and employs many people.
With that said, not to go too off topic, but kind of related to what you said, didn't Microsoft just buy LinkedIn?
They announced, I believe it was yesterday, that they were purchasing LinkedIn.
Now, why is that a good thing, or is it a good or a bad thing? It could be both. Well, why does LinkedIn need to be bought by Microsoft?
I don't know the details, but companies, I don't know if this is the case in this particular deal, but one of the things that matters to a startup is being able to cash out in the end and bring in, pay off the investors. And my understanding is that's a cash deal, and therefore there'll be a lot of cash available, and it will change the financing model of what had been LinkedIn. And obviously Microsoft thought it was a good thing, or they wouldn't have done it.
Well, there's just so much complexity to all of this because I follow a lot of the big VC people on Twitter, like Mark Andreessen, and he laughs at a lot of my jokes, and we read the same books. I don't understand half of what he's saying much of the time, but he's very, very smart, and I see that you have to be a very proactive thinker to be successful in the tech world because of the rapid change, and you seem to have a real handle on this and have a great world view. So any predictions for the future?
Well, first, I did meet Mark Andreessen back in the early 90s. He was at the University Supercomputer Center at Champaign-Urbana working on Mosaic, which then got replicated at Netscape. But what a VC needs is an ability to look into the future and figure out, what need is there that's not yet met. And that's hard because the products may not exist. So you're not saying, well, I need a better car. You're envisioning something that people don't even know about yet and thinking that there would be a need there for that. Social media is a great example. It was hard to picture what social media was before it was there, and
Sure.
Now it's prevalent.
Or even Uber or Lyft or these shared.
It's all about innovation and making things more efficient and moving beyond what a traditional way of doing things.
We'll probably need a part two for this part of the
Yes.
topic, which I find fascinating. But I've read all of these articles about robots replacing people to work. And in the long run, it could be a good thing because you could be working from your living room and you don't need to go to that store. But I read about an article about a store in Japan that had 30 employees selling, I think they were just selling customer goods. I forget what the goods were. Now, the robot greets you. It's not at the level of technology that they want, but hands them the thing. And then one man runs it in case it breaks down. And the other 3 workers work from home, but they laid off about 25 people. Is that the future that we fear? Or a future that we embrace by figuring out, don't you need people to fix these robots?
Well, this is not a new problem.
Sure.
The Industrial Revolution made a lot of jobs archaic and made things far more efficient. And as we look back, that was probably very beneficial. It created lots of new goods and services, and workers got in the end paid more and could buy them. And agriculture is a good example because 120 years ago, most Americans lived on the farm, and we have a very productive agricultural system here in the U.S. and many fewer workers. People have moved to the city, so things change. It's all about change, and you asked a very important question.
I have another question, Eric. I hope you can. I need you to come back and visit us.
We have another minute or two.
We have a couple more minutes left, but we're past 16 minutes, so we have a couple of guests too that we have to get in.
Well, I'm happy to come back at any point. So
maybe we'll have a monthly tech.
Yes, I would love to.
A monthly tech call in, or if you can't always make the
Tech
studio.
Talk.
Tech Talk.
I'd be happy to. You're near a subway stop. That's all that matters here in New York.
We're right here at that Canal Street stop. It comes right into the
landline phones work as well. Modern technology, or not as modern.
Well, this was very informative, and thank you very much for joining us in the studio today.
My pleasure.